Good morning. I didn't even ask him to do that, but I'm glad he did because it'll make the editing of the video a lot easier. So it sounds like there was this raucous applause going on and people whistling and jumping up and down. We'll find some soundtrack somewhere of a bunch of applause. Do me a favor, turn in your Bible to Genesis 45. It's the very beginning of the book. If you'll open the cover up, you'll be right close to Genesis. Somebody asked me, there's this joke going around that says that somebody asked when I was going to be the senior pastor of the church, and then somebody else said after the rapture. So somebody today asked me if this was pre-rapture preview, post-rapture preview, I guess it would. And it might be because I can see a lot of you that are still going to be here then too. So I want to say something serious. We're going to have fun today. But I do want to say something serious. We talked a little bit. It is Memorial Day weekend. Tomorrow is Memorial Day. In all seriousness, I know we thanked those servicemen and women and the families of those folks before. But it says in the Bible, talking to the children of Israel, God was telling them that they were living in houses at certain times. They were living in houses that they didn't build. And that they were drinking from vineyards that they didn't plant. And they were eating crops that they didn't plant and that they didn't even harvest. And I believe that today, for any of us that didn't serve in the military, we are living in freedoms from my own heart, particularly speaking about me. I know that I'm living with freedoms that I didn't have to sacrifice for. And I just want to thank all of you who have families that have served or are serving, or have someone in your family, and all of those who served or are serving. Thank you so much for fighting for the freedoms, for sacrificing for the freedoms that I'm able to live in. Can we give them another? And honestly, I'll probably use some of that applause in the editing of the thing, because those two combined, maybe overlay them or something like that. It'll really sound like I was super good. We'll probably do that at the end, though, when you're just so tired of hearing me talk. I'm going to do my best for these guys and for the folks that are watching at home for the few minutes that they're going to be watching it, because they'll probably turn it off. But I'm going to try my best to stand here. I'm a roving, I would have been a good roving reporter or something like that, because I have like adult onset what is it called? HD8? Yeah, I can't even say it. I have OCD, but it should be CDO because that's actually in alphabetical order, and that's the way it should be. But I also get really distracted. Well, I get distracted really easily by like shiny stuff. So if something changes over here, I'll completely lose my train of thought. But it's okay. We'll have fun today. We may not learn a lot, but we're going to laugh, and so God's good, right? Laughter does good like a medicine. We have been talking, first of all, let me say who I am. I'm Larry Morgan. I'm the administrative pastor here. And I know you're asking, who in the world did I bribe for them to give me a microphone and like 40 minutes worth of time? Actually, we don't have another service after this one, so 40 minutes is it's easy to do that or more. But who did I bribe? And I didn't have to bribe anybody because everybody left, basically. No. Pastor Dale and Carrie are at our Foursquare convention. Our denomination is having a convention, so they're suffering for the Lord. This year, the convention is in Hawaii. Yeah, so they are suffering for the Lord. Pastor Matthew and Amber are also there. We pray that Pastor Dale and Carrie have fantastic weather. I hope it's raining like cats and dogs on Matthew and Amber. I hope they're standing next to Pastor and Carrie, and Matthew's the only one getting wet because of the rain. No, that's only a little bit true. We're dealing with jealousy issues here. I used to struggle with jealousy. Now I just embrace it. So we've been talking about, for the past several weeks, we're in a series we're finishing up today called Generosity. We've been talking about several commitments that we are making, or that we have made, not only as people, but as a church, that we're committing to be generous people. And what I want to do is recap kind of the past several weeks and just give you a little bit of what we talked about, and then talk about the last thing, our last commitment point today. So 4 commitments that we talked about. The first one is that we tithe to God, that we have made a decision that we are going to tithe to God. And we understand that we're not giving to God. Tithe is not a gift to God. We're really returning what is already his, right? That if I were to borrow your car and then I came to you with your car keys and I said, here, I want to give you this car, it's not really exactly right? So tithing is not giving to God, it's returning what's his. It's all his, all 100% is his. And he says, give me the first 10% and I'll bless all of it. I'll bless the rest. We know that tithing answers the question of who comes first, me or God. And that when I tithe, not only am I telling God that he comes first, but I'm telling myself that I don't come first. So that's really important for me, particularly. I'm probably known, one of the things that I'm probably the most known for is my humility. Because that's probably one of my best traits. I have many fantastic traits, and I'm really excellent at a lot of things, but probably humility is my number one thing that I'm the best at. But I have to tell myself regularly, hey, you don't come first. I also know that 90%, okay, so we're going to a little math lesson here. If we have 100% and we tithe, how much is a tithe? 10%, right? So if we have 100% and we tithe 10%, then that leaves us with 90%, okay? I know, and I know that you know, that 90% that is blessed will go much farther than 100% that's still under the curse. And that's what the Lord promises that he does. That when we tithe, we answer the question, who comes first, me or God? When we tithe, we say that God comes first. The second week, we talked about giving, that we give to people. We give to other people. And we learned that, that giving is over and above tithing. Remember, we said that if you're not tithing, but you give, you're not really, tithing gets you to the level playing field. And then after that, when you give, that's really giving. Does that make sense? Then you don't have to give here to the church. You can give to people, and you can give. It doesn't have to just be money. It can be many different things that you give. We also found out that giving really answers the question, am I generous? So if tithing answers the question, who comes first, me or God, then giving answers the question, am I a generous person? We also know that the principle of multiplication is released when we give. Do you remember the story? I think we talked about it in that service where the disciples fed the 5,000 people that were there. Now, I said that way on purpose. We know that the power to feed those 5,000 people came through Jesus Christ. Remember when they stole the kids' food? And I've never understood why they had so much bread. It's 5 loaves and 2 fish, right? If they were making fish sandwiches, somebody wasn't going to get some fish. But they took this kid's food and they gave it to Jesus, and Jesus took it. He didn't steal it, they did. But he took it and he blessed it, right? And then he broke it, and then he gave it to them. Now, it doesn't say that he gave them baskets and baskets and baskets and baskets to the disciples. It doesn't say that that's what he gave. It says he took it, he blessed it, he broke it, and he gave it back to the disciples. It's when the disciples started giving it out to the 5,000 people plus men plus women and children, that's when it started to multiply. Now, I can't wait to get to heaven and see the TV screen, and I can go on the DVR or whatever and hit the button, and because I want to see exactly how that worked. They just started handing it out, and it was more than enough, right? It was more than enough. There were baskets left over. That's one thing about our God. I didn't even give them this in first service, that he is a God of abundance. He's God of more than enough, not just sufficiency, but more than enough. Why? So we can give to other people, because that's what releases the principle of multiplication. It would have been enough for the disciples if they would have eaten it. It would have satisfied them. But then what would the other people have done? So when we give, that's what brings about multiplication. So we learned about that. We also learned, between the second week and the third week, we had Mother's Day. So Pastor Carrie brought a fantastic message. Were you here for that? Did you hear that about carrying things and laying things down? It was great. She's not here. You don't have to clap for her. No, it's good. I'm sure you're probably clapping for me somehow. Subconsciously or what, I couldn't think of the word, subordinately or subconsciously. But no, it was a good word. It would be worthy of clapping if she were here, but since she's not, then it's not. One thing about that, though, is something shiny in my mind that I'm remembering is that second service, I don't know if you were here second service, but she had this backpack, both services, and she had these cans of different things that had labels on them of things that we were putting down, social media, or just all different kinds of stuff. I don't remember what it was. I paid attention in the moment, but I've slept twice at least since then, so I've completely forgotten it. But, oh, by the way, you have to listen really quick to me when I talk, because I talk kind of fast and kind of shotgun style, and I'll talk about this and then I'll start talking about this. And somebody told me before, they're like, I'm excited to hear what you're going to say today. And I said, so am I, because I never know what I'm going to say until after I've said it, usually. And so, what were we talking about? The backpack, and she was building a pyramid. Did you remember this? She's building a pyramid, and she had like 2 cans left, and so she pulled this one out, and she set it not on top of the pyramid. She set it over here to the side. I almost died. I almost got up and grabbed the one can and said, but if you did, because in my mind I'm going, okay, you set this one over here. If you'd have set it there, then the last one could have been on the very top. It would have been a perfect. There's no point to any of that story other than it just reminded me that she spoke that day. So that was the first one we talked about tithing. The second one we talked about giving. Then Pastor Carrie spoke. It was a wonderful message. She did great. Carrie, if you're ever listening to this, if this is the one we put online, you did an awesome job. With the third week of this series was we talked about stewardship. We talked about stewarding our resources. Not only did we talk about stewarding our resources, we talked about stewarding our resources well. There is a difference. You could be a steward and still not steward something well. We learned in that lesson, in that teaching, we learned that stewardship answers the question, what's my perspective of God? How do I see God? Do I see God as someone with regard to finances? Do I see him as all up in my business trying to get me to give my money to somebody else? Or do I see God as the owner of everything, and do I see myself just as the steward? Anybody ever been on a plane or on a cruise ship and they're stewards on those things? They don't own the airplane, but the steward has control over pretty much everything that goes on in that airplane, right? So stewardship, good stewardship defines or answers the question, how do I view God? Do I view all of this as his already? And so whatever he says to do with it, that's what I'm going to do with it. So that's stewardship. Today, we're going to talk about trust. We're going to talk about trusting God. So our commitment today is that we trust God. Let me give you a little bit of information about me. My wife and I have been on staff, or I've been on staff, and where I go, she goes, right? Awesome. Thank goodness. We've been married for 23 years. Can you imagine being married to me for 23 years? I get on my own nerves sometimes. I can't imagine, not usually, but it takes a bit. But we've been here for all of our lives, really, in this church. But I've been on staff for 10 years. Previous to coming here, I worked for a company called Gray Bar Electric Company. I was a salesman, sales rep, or I prefer to say an account executive because it makes me sound much more important. But I was a salesman. And so what I did was I would go visit customers. I was very, very fortunate in that in my career there, I worked there about 18 years, 15 to 18 years. I worked there, and I got to call on several different companies. I had we would sell things. We didn't make anything. We sold what other electrical manufacturers made. We sold electrical equipment, lights and wire, and really anything that I could talk somebody into buying, I would sell it. I sold a tricycle one time. I used to tell people everything from telephone poles to toilet paper, I'll sell it. If somebody will give me a purchase order for it or pay me, I'll get it. I have been to Home Depot and bought something and turned around and sold it to a customer before because they needed it. So that's what I did for them. I supplied their needs. So, but I spent time, I called on large accounts, institutional accounts, hospitals and universities and large industrial accounts. I had some a tire manufacturer was one of my customers, Philip Morris. There's a lot of companies that I called on that are no longer in business, which I'm not sure how to feel exactly about that. I think as the salesman in me says, yeah, I got all of their money. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. But what I would do, what I was charged with doing, was to establish and cultivate relationships with these people. Now, they could buy the same stuff that I was selling. They could buy it from 5 or 6 other people, and in most cases, probably a lot cheaper than I was selling it. I was selling solutions to them. I was selling me. I wasn't selling lock nuts or wire or telephones or whatever. I was selling my services. I was selling that if you're dealing with me, I'm the relationship that you're going to have, and whatever you need, I'm going to get it for you. I was selling trust to them, and they trusted me. I don't know why. I told them there's only 2 times I'll ever lie to you. That's if it's necessary, and the other time is if it's convenient. Those are the only 2 times. I get in trouble with people now because people say that I don't answer the phone. If you've ever called me and I've not answered the phone, there's only 2 reasons that I won't answer the phone if you call. One is because I can't, and the other is because I don't want to. But for you guys, I'm looking through the room, yep, everybody in here, it's only because I can't, because I'm probably praying for someone with this hand, I'm in the Word with this hand probably studying. So you just picture me as you're calling me, and if I don't answer, I'm doing the Lord's work. It's why I haven't answered the phone. It's not because I look at it and go, I'm not talking to them. There are some people I do that too, but it's none of y'all, okay? Well, maybe it's... Maybe. So anyway, I had this reputation of being trustworthy. In our life, everything that we do in our life comes down to trust, really, if you think about it. We've been talking about finances. Our financial system was, in essence, is built on trust. Anybody have a job? Anybody a professional athlete, a professional sports star type person that would have got maybe a signing bonus? I know they give signing bonuses out to pastors, and not really, that was a joke. I thought it'd be a lot funnier, but it wasn't. Somebody thought it was. That's awesome. But usually most people don't get a signing bonus. They usually don't get paid your first day of work, right? So you work for a couple weeks and then they pay you. You are trusting that that employer is actually going to pay you for the work that you just did, okay? Anybody have a bank? Anybody want to write down their bank account number and just give it to me later on? It'll be totally fine. I thought that would be funnier too. When you deal with a bank, you trust that when you give them your money, they're not going to give it to somebody else, right? That they're going to hold it, and that when you need it, it's going to be there. So we trust. Anybody still write checks? I do. It irritates the people behind me in line at Food Lion, and I love it. Actually, I don't love it. Now, most places, you just hand them the check, and then they run it through their machine or whatever. But if you write a check or if you use a debit card, then the vendor, the Food Lion, or whoever it might be, is trusting that you have money in the bank and that the bank is going to pay them, right? Anybody use a credit card? Now, I won't get on, maybe I will get on a little bit of a soapbox about credit cards. If you use credit cards, pay them off in full every month, okay? The word says that when we are in debt, we become a slave to that debtor or that thing that we are indebted to. So I encourage you to do that, to pay them off if you use them. Long gone are the days, but we're trying to bring them back of not actually buying something if you can't afford it, right? So we want to try to bring that back. But if you use a credit card, then the company that you bought something from, they are trusting that that credit card company is going to pay them for the product you just bought. And the credit card company is trusting that you are going to pay your bill. So there's trust in everything. How many people will probably go out and eat after this fantastic message today? We probably all will. Or we'll eat somewhere, or we have before we've eaten. Anywhere other than a fast food place that you go in, if it's a sit-down type restaurant, you rarely pay for your food before it comes, before you eat it. Now, I've never dined and dashed. I've done things that are probably a whole lot worse than that, but I've never done that. But the restaurateur he is believing and trusting that you're going to pay for the food that he just worked and fixed and brought to you. He's trusting. We trust things and people every day. Every day of our life, we trust in things. We trust that when we hit a light switch, that the light's going to come on, right? We trust that that the pew that you're sitting in, you trusted when you sat down that pew was going to hold you, right? When you hit the brakes in your car, you trusted that it was going to stop. Otherwise, you were going to have to plan ahead, pretty far ahead. You trust Again, when you flip the switch to turn on lights, you trust that those things are going to happen. Now, why is it that we have such a difficult time trusting God? It seems like we have a hard time trusting God. Did I tell you to turn to Genesis 45? Okay, I couldn't remember if I had or not. We're going to talk a little bit. There's a bunch of people in the Word that trusted God, that the Bible tells us about, a lot of stories. There's one person that I want to talk about in particular. His name is Joseph, and it's not Joseph and Mary. It's Joseph and the coat of many colors. You remember that story? You remember about him? You remember that I need to stay up here, I guess. Do you remember that he had a dream, right? I'm going to paraphrase this significantly. It's going to be loosely based on the Bible until we know. It's going to all be true as far as you know. Joseph was, he had this dream, and he dreamt that his brothers were going to bow down to him, and that he was going to be an authority over his brothers at some point. So Joseph woke up, and what did he do? First thing he did, he went and told his brothers, oh, by the way, you're going to bow down to me. Now, his brothers didn't really much like him anyway because he was the favorite of the 12, right? That reminds me, don't play favorites. If you've got more than one kid, unless, of course, is my sister here? I don't think she is, unless, of course, you can't help but play favorites like they had to in my family, just because my sister was so much better than I. So, but he was the favorite of the family. So his brothers didn't really like him anyway, and this didn't help any. So then he had another dream, and in that dream, he dreamt that his parents and his brothers were going to bow down to him, and he was going to be an authority over them at some point in his life. And so then, being the punk that he was, he told them, he's not really a punk, but he just wasn't brilliant, that he went and told them all, oh, by the way, I had another dream, and brothers, you're going to bow down to me. And oh, mom and dad, so are you. Well, the brothers had about had enough. So what they did was they were all out, and they said, hey, let's kill him. But they kind of hated to take it that far. And so they threw him in a pit, and then they made believe. They took his clothes and put him in some blood, and then took him back to his father and said that he was torn apart, killed by some wild beasts. In the meantime, what they did was they sold him to some foreigners that were traveling through. They sold him as a slave. So his father thinks he's dead. The brothers don't really know what's going to happen to him. So over the course of time, he ended up in Egypt as a slave. And he ended up in the house of Pharaoh, who was the ruler of Egypt. So he's a slave in the house of Pharaoh. And the word even says in Genesis that God was with him and that he blessed everything that Joseph did. And so he really caught the Pharaoh's eye, and the Pharaoh put him in charge of everything. Basically everything that went on in the Pharaoh's house, Joseph was in charge of. Well, Joseph also caught the eye of Pharaoh's wife. Now, the word says that Joseph ran away. When she tried to seduce him, he ran away. This is completely free, okay? But in situations like that, we don't walk away from situations like that. You run away from situations like that. Amen? Okay. So what he did was he ran away. Well, she said, oh, no, you don't. And rather than being found out that she seduced him, she claimed that he had seduced and attacked her. So into the prison he went. Okay? So he's in prison. He had 2 dreams that said he was going to be great. He got thrown in a pit. He got sold as a slave. He was elevated from that slave position to really ruler over just about everything that was going on. And then he was lied against. He was thrown into the prison. So now he's in prison, and he sees these 2 guys. He meets these 2 guys. One of them was the baker, and one of them was the head butler. They had done something wrong, and they were in prison too, okay? So they have these dreams. Everybody follow me so far? I know I'm speeding through it, but I've only got like 30 more minutes to talk. 22 more minutes to talk. So we're in the prison with the butler. Yeah, butler and the baker. There's no butcher. There's no butcher in this story. I thought there was. For years, I thought the butcher and the butler and the baker. But then that was some other story. I don't know what that was from. But anyway, I literally wrote butcher down in my notes. Then I went back and I was like, that's not right. That doesn't seem right. where were we? Oh, the butler and the baker were in prison, and they had dreams, and they told Joseph these dreams, right? And so Joseph, the butler tells Joseph this dream, and Joseph interprets it. And he says, here's what it means. It means basically that you're going to be restored to your position as the head butler, and everything's going to go great, okay? And oh, by the way, when this happens, remember me. Remember, put a good word in with the Pharaoh for me, okay? And he said, and to the baker, it's not such good news. It's you're also going to be called out of the prison, but you're going to be killed. So no need to really remember me. You can if you'd like to, but you're going to have a lot on your mind for the next 3 days anyway. So there really wasn't much point for him to tell the baker to remember him because it wasn't going to do any good. So, but guess what happened? Absolutely nothing. Joseph stayed in prison. Nobody remembered. Well, the baker died. The butler forgot completely all about Joseph until a couple years later. The word even says a full 2 years later, when Pharaoh had a dream that nobody could interpret. Nobody could understand it. And then the butler says, oh, by the way, I met this guy a couple of years ago. He was real good with dreams, and I bet he could help you out. So what they did was they cleaned Joseph up. They called him up out of the prison, and they said, okay, interpret this dream. Well, Joseph prayed about it, and he made sure up front to say, this is not me that's able to do this. This is through the Lord is who's doing this. So he interpreted this dream of 2 seasons that Egypt, the world really, was going to get ready to go through. One was a season of plenty. There were going to be 7 years of plenty, and then after that it was going to be followed by 7 years of famine. So the Pharaoh was pretty impressed by that. He set Joseph up again to be the ruler and rule some things in his home and in the country. And Joseph started using his wisdom to plan for and to save. This is a good financial lesson too. In the time of plenty, he put things aside because he knew that a time of famine was coming, right? That's good stewardship, yeah? So he started taking these things and he started saving and he started stockpiling. He started doomsday prepping. He had a bug out bag somewhere probably in the back. In the good times or in the times of plenty, he was preparing for the lean times and the times of famine. He was preparing. He was being a good steward. So then his brothers, there was this famine started, right? So when everything's great, nobody needs much help. Nobody wants much help. But when the famine starts, then everybody across the whole area, really across the world, as it was known at that moment, was coming to Egypt because they had grain, they had what they needed, and Joseph was being very shrewd, not in a negative way, but he was being by the time that famine was over, he had amassed for Egypt and for Pharaoh this enormous amount of wealth. Well, his brothers came, and they didn't recognize him. But after a course of time, and you can read all of this, it would really make a good TV show if they should make a TV show about it. It'd be better than some of the stuff that's on now. But after time, he revealed to his brothers, he said, I told you so. I told you you were going to bow down. Is that how he said it? That's not at all what he said. Let's read what he said in Genesis 45, verses 7 and 8. It says this, and God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now this is to his brothers. So now it was not you who sent me here, but it was God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh. That means like a high-ranking official. And Lord of all his house and a ruler throughout the land of Egypt. Joseph knew that God was the one who had ordered his steps to be able to save not only the nation, but to save his family as well. And the reason I say that is because I think that Joseph went through a lot of the same kinds of things that we go through today. Maybe not on that. Maybe we've never been in a pit. Maybe we've never been in prison. But how many people have felt like you're in a pit in your life or felt like you're bound in a prison? I think that Joseph rode the same roller coaster that a lot of us do highs and lows, and opportunities to be able to trust God, and opportunities to not trust God as well. Does that make sense? That we had, just like Joseph had, we have opportunities to make a choice. Are we going to trust God? Or are we not going to trust God? I think that we can look at his life and see some of the things that he did, and we can apply that to our own. And we'll know that we can trust God no matter what. Joseph did. Why do you think that we have such a difficult time trusting God sometimes? Do you think it's maybe because we can't see God? Well, how many people have a cell phone? If you have a cell phone and you hit the button to call me and I don't answer, maybe that's not the best example. So if you have a cell phone and you hit the button to call your wife, you or your husband, you assume and you're pretty sure that phone call is going to go to her or him and that it's going to work. But how many of us can see the radio waves that makes that happen? None of us, right? What about the wind? We can't see the wind. We see the effects of the wind, but we can't actually see the wind. But there are millions and millions of people whose homes are powered by wind-generated electricity. But we believe in things that we can't see, but a lot of times we have a hard time believing in God that we can't see. Or maybe we can't hear. Maybe we feel like we can't hear from God. Just a little plug for Wednesday night series, the past 6 weeks, and we'll finish it up this Wednesday night. We've been talking about the voice of God and ways that we can hear the voice of God. So those are a couple things that kind of make it difficult. But the other thing is that when everything that we see with our physical eyes is so in such contradiction to what we believe the Lord told us. Do you not think that when Joseph was in the pit, he's thinking, this has absolutely nothing to do with the promise, with this dream that I saw. So that's an opportunity that he had in a moment where his surroundings and the things that he actually saw with his physical eyes were completely opposite of what he believed that the Lord had told him. It's difficult to trust God in those kinds of things. Here's some other reasons why I believe that we don't trust God. I think the first thing is because of pride and power. It's cool because those both start with P, so that's really cool too. But pride and power, we're very prideful people. I'm not. I'm probably the most humble person you know. But a lot of people, we have pride issues. We have power issues. Sometimes we don't want to trust God because either it's not in our timing. I want it now. We're an I want it now society, right? Or we want to say, I want to do it my way. I know what I'm doing. I can do it better. That's one reason. Maybe another reason might be the fear of failure. I've failed at things before. Anybody else ever failed at something before? It's not a fun thing to worry about. But a lot of times we might not trust God or might not believe or have faith in what God says because we're just afraid of failing. What happens if it doesn't work? Another thing is past experiences. Things that we've experienced in the past where maybe we've trusted God, but it didn't turn out exactly like what we thought it should have. You know, our minds are finite, okay? There is a beginning and an end to our mind. We can't comprehend everything. But we're dealing with, and we have relationship with, and we've been created by an infinite God. So we're trying to reconcile with a finite mind, an infinite God, and we don't understand. So when we draw a picture of healing, or we draw a picture of success, or we draw a picture of provision, then all of a sudden, just maybe it's because we're Americans and we're conceited, maybe it's because whatever reason it is, but we say, this is the definition of success, or this is the definition of healing, or this is the definition of provision in my life. And if what God is doing doesn't match that, then we think that he's failed us. I think we need to rethink that we don't get to define what provision is. We don't get to define what success is. We don't get to define what healing is. That God defines those things. We don't even get to define what we self-esteem type things. You know what I'm saying? you hear it many times. Who cares what people think about you? And it's true. It doesn't matter what people think about you. It really doesn't even matter what you think about you, because what God thinks about you and what he has created you to be, that's what matters, not what you think about yourself. We need a lot of times to put our own mind and our own thinking in line with what God says to be the truth about us. We can trust him that. So past experiences a lot of times will affect our ability to trust God. And the last one is that we just have poor memories. We have a poor memory when it comes to the past, yeah? We always think that this is the worst situation that I've ever been in my entire life. And if you will think back and if you will spend a little bit of time, you'll realize you've probably been through a lot darker times than what you're going through right now. And God was faithful in those times. But we have poor memories a lot of time. So those are some of the reasons why it's difficult. It is difficult. But trust is really at the core, and it's at the root of our relationship, even with Christ. We trusted that what the Word says about Christ, that he died on a cross for our sins so that we could be forgiven. That when we trust in that, that's really the root and the basis of our relationship. Being able to trust things and people is not really the win. Being able to trust God is really the win. When we can trust God, then we can do whatever he calls us to do. Some ways that we can trust. What are some ways that we can learn to trust God? And I think I've got 4 things up here. The first one is to be in the Word. It's very, very difficult to trust somebody you don't know. When any relationship is started, you have to build trust, right? And how do you trust someone if you don't know them? Well, one of the best ways to get to know God is to be in the Word. And once you learn the characteristics and the traits and the many facets of God, you can start to trust him, and you can start to trust that what he says, he will do. Remember, it's his definition of what he says, not yours. But what he says, what he promises, he will do. And the more we read in the Word, the more we will learn to trust him. The next thing is to be able to hear his voice. There's several ways that we can hear his voice. Being in the Word is one of the best ways, because we start to recognize and learn his character. Through godly wisdom is another way. Through the Holy Spirit. Through an inner witness. Through words of prophecy that people would speak to you. Through authorities in our life. There are several ways that we can learn to hear God's voice. And when we hear his voice, the more we hear his voice, the more trust we'll be able to have, because we'll be confident that that's what the Lord has called us to do. The third thing is Nike had this fantastic slogan, and I guess they still do: just do it. Now, it's easy to say. So basically, how can you trust God? Trust God. That's a super simple way to do it. But it's so true. Just do it. Start small. Start small. We've been talking about finances. I'm not a financial wizard in any stretch of the word, but I counsel with a lot of folks, or I meet with a lot of folks about some financial things. I have this, I don't know, this ability, this knack, this, I guess I'm not afraid to offend. I'm an equal opportunity offender. I'm not really afraid to offend people by saying, when they call and have questions about finances or they need help, some of the first things I'm going to ask are going to be like, okay, so what do you make? You know, you called me, or you called the church for help, so you kind of open yourself up to some of these questions. And I'm like, you know, if you don't want to tell me, you don't have to, but you're also probably not going to get any help, or not going to get as much as if we have a conversation about, what do you make? What do you spend? What are your expenses? Okay, so do you have cable? I have nothing. There's nothing. If you work for the cable company, I apologize. But if you got somebody that can't make their bills and they're spending $100 a month on cable, I just found you $100, right? Do you smoke? I don't care if you smoke or not. But if you smoke but you can't make your light bill, then one of my questions is do you smoke? And if they say yeah, I say, well, how are you paying for cigarettes? Well, do you drink? Are you sober? I'll ask them. It's crazy. Now, nobody ever needs any help is going to call the church. Feel free to call the church. I do it in love. What do you mean you smoke? I'm not giving you any money. I don't say that. What I'm able to do is to be like a third party, or like just, I'm not in the middle of the crisis, so I can look at it with a little bit of things that say, Well, what about this? Have you ever thought, you know what, I've never thought about reducing my cable bill. I've never thought about going from the 1,400 channels down to 30. I could save $400 a month by doing that. Click, they hang up. They're like, thanks, bye. So I don't even remember what we were talking about. No, just do it. Oh, so I can't counsel with these people. I met with these people, and this one person, oh, she was so sweet. She came in and wanted to talk about tithing. And she wanted to tithe, but she had these scriptures that talked about tithing. And then she had found these other scriptures that say, work it out and yourself and do what you want to do or something like that. I don't remember how she drew it around. But basically, I said, well, that's fine, but what about this? And she said, yeah, but it says this. And I said, well, you don't have to tithe if you don't want to. You're the one who came to me and wanted me to talk you into tithing, I guess. I said, do this. Let's just try it. Doesn't the word say to test me in this? Isn't that the word, what God says at one point? He says, try me in this, and I will prove to you that I will open up the windows of heaven and you won't be able to contain it. So I said, just try it for 6 months. I said this to a couple people. I have to be careful because you don't always know what people make. And so if you say something, and I've said to a couple people, if you'll tithe for 6 months, at the end of that 6 months, if you come back to me and you can honestly say that your life is not different. Now, your bank account might not be different, but that your life is not better because of that. I will give you every penny that you tithed to the church. I'll give you that back. Now, you got to be careful because you don't know what people make. So I might make a promise now, and then in 6 months, I might not want to give it back. But I've never had anybody. It's so funny because Pastor says, I don't know what you give. I do. And I've got my eye on you. No, I don't. But I do have my eye on you. You're going to need to step it up a little bit this year. I saw you bought a boat. Where'd that come from? No, I'm totally joking. What are we talking about? Oh, yeah. I said, just try it. I said, just try it. And I've said this to several people, and I've not had anyone ever come back to me and say, hey, can I have my tithe money back? Never. Because if you'll just try it, if you'll be faithful in the little things, it even says, try him on that. He's the one who said it. Try him to see if he'll be faithful in the little things. I guarantee you he will. And he'll be faithful in the big things. But it's a way to start to trust the Lord, is to start to trust the Lord. Right? Okay. And keep track. That's the last thing about ways that we can learn to trust God is keeping track. I'm not a journaler. Is that the word? It is now. I'm not someone who journals a lot. We have daily devotions that we do here, and we a lot of times folks will write down what the Lord's saying, and I do that from time to time. But I'm not somebody who keeps a diary or any of those things, but I will from time to time when the Lord, I love that. He should have been up here playing the whole time. Makes me feel, I'm getting ready to get into a hum here in a minute. But I will write down things that when the Lord does something, a miraculous thing, or even something small that I've been praying about or stressing about or whatever, I'll write those things down. I encourage you to do that. Keep track. Keep track of what the Lord does, because when you go through a difficult time, you can look back and say, oh, I forgot about when I couldn't pay my bills. I forgot about when the doctor said I had this. And then a month later, I went to the doctor and he said, oh, I guess I made a mistake because I can't find it now. You know, we have poor memories. So if we'll keep track, that'll help that. So what we're really talking about, even though we've been talking about finances, but what we're really talking about is that everything we do, we trust God. And so I was trying to come up with this really catchy way of saying people who trust God, they have hope, they're able to cope, and they stay off dope. Hey, and it rhymed, but it was dumb. So I didn't say that one. Then I had another one that had they weigh their options, they walk in obedience, and they wait on God's timing, which is all true, but really, when it comes down to it, people who trust God, there's 4 things that they do, and we've already talked about them for the past month. People who trust God, they put God first. They put God first in everything that they do. And people who trust God, they live generous lives. And people who trust God, they view God as a loving Father, not as someone who is out to take, but as someone who is ready to give them exactly what they can handle at the time. And then finally, people who trust God are led by God in everything that they do. Our verse of the week was, trust the Lord with all your heart and don't rely on your own understanding, right? But trust God and that he will direct your paths. So those are the things that people who trust God, they put God first, they live generous lives, they view God as a loving Father, and they're led by God in everything that they do. As we're finishing up, I want to tell you a little bit more about mine and my wife's walk with the Lord. We got married. We've been married 23 years this fall. We got married in 1993, and I was working, and we really felt called to the ministry. We really felt like we were supposed to quit. I was supposed to quit my job. We were supposed to quit our jobs, and that we were supposed to go to Bible college. Now, our families, we told them. I hadn't told my work yet because I'm not stupid. I had faith. I just wasn't dumb. No. We were all set to do this. We told our family, and they were, as pleased as your family can be when you say you're getting ready to move away. As clearly as we know that was what the Lord was calling us to do, we just felt, we continued to pray about it, and we were willing to do it, and we were making arrangements to do it. And then we felt like the Lord said, you're still called, but that's not the direction that I want you to go. I want you to continue to do what you're doing and minister where you are. So we felt this call. But there was a significant amount of time that we just had to continue to do. I've told people, in the absence of hearing a clear word from God, you do what God told you to do the last time you heard a clear word from God. Does that make sense? I don't know what else I'm supposed to be doing, but I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so that's what we did. We were marketplace ministers for years. Because we realized that ministry was not on a pulpit, was not on a paid staff at a church. That's not necessarily what ministry is. It's a part of ministry. But ministry is what happens at Gray Bar Electric Company when someone's father dies or their mother dies, and then they come get me, and I walk into the break room, and they've just lost it. Ministry is when somebody gets cancer or somebody in their family gets cancer, and they call you, and they say, I don't know what to do. But they know you do. They know you know the Lord. That's what ministry is. So we continued to do that. We did what we knew to do until 2006, December of 2006. I don't even know how many years that is, 13 years, 14, 12 years, something like that. I do the math here. When Pastor Dale called me and said, would you consider coming on staff as the administrative pastor? And I told him we would pray about it, and so we prayed. But prior to that was in 2006. In 2004, we felt like the Lord told us to sell our home, to start to make some plans that some things were going to change. We didn't know what that meant. So we put our house on the market, and we moved into a garage apartment at my mother's house. It was a very small garage. It was an even smaller apartment, which is amazing. We were tiny house people before tiny house people were cool. Nobody had ever heard of a tiny house we had. We had lived in one for years. We didn't know what the Lord, but we trusted him. We had plenty of opportunities to trust the Lord. So then when Pastor Dale called 2 years after that and said, would you consider coming on staff? We said, absolutely. How many people know that there was probably some compensation differences between what I was doing and what I started doing here? But we were able to trust the Lord. It's another opportunity to trust the Lord. In 2008, we bought a house in Kannapolis, and if I were to sit down and we didn't lie on anything, we're like, seriously, you going to give us money to buy this house? We were able to trust the Lord. We've never gone without. We're good stewards, but but we've never gone without. We've had opportunities to trust the Lord. And that's what I want to encourage you in today, is that throughout our lives, we ride this roller coaster. But let me encourage you, let's don't ride that roller coaster anymore. I think the enemy buys the ticket for the roller coaster and says, here, get on this. But what we can do is if we can trust God when everything around us is a roller coaster, but if we're able to trust God and we're able to put him first in everything that we do, not just our finances, but particularly our finances, because for guys anyway, that's how we keep score, really. It's also, it's talked about in the Bible more than really any other subject, money is, because it's so important to us. And the Lord knows that it's so important to us. But if we can trust God, if we can put him first in everything we do, everything about our lives, if we put God first, if we can be generous with our time and our talent and our treasure, if we can view God as a loving Father, and then if we can follow his leading, then we will be right where we need to be with regard to trusting him. Stand with me if you would. Bow your head. I want to pray for us as we're finishing up today. Father, I thank you for your love. I thank you that we can trust you, that you are very, very trustworthy. I thank you that you will bring to our memory the times in the past where you have been faithful, and that will build our faith for the future. Father, I thank you that when we go through times where we have an opportunity to trust you, that you will show us the steps to take, and that you will also show us that other people are watching us as we trust you, and that we are giving them faith, and we are building up their ability to trust you. Because if they say, if she can do it, then I can do it. Or she's been through something worse than I have, therefore I know I can go through this. Father, thank you for that. Thank you for those opportunities that you've given us to example trusting you to other people. Lord, I thank you for these people that are gathered here. Again, we thank you for the sacrifices that were made by the servicemen and women. Father, I thank you for the ability that we have to go out of this place not only encouraged and trusting you by the word that you've shared today with us, but also that we're able to give other people encouragement, and we're able to give people hope. We thank you for that. In your name we pray. And everybody said, amen.